The cuffs snapped shut with a metallic click that seemed to echo louder than the bustling street around him. Dr. Samuel Carter, once a celebrated professor of American history, now stood in the middle of Jefferson Avenue with rain dripping from the brim of his hat, staring into the smirking face of an officer who looked like he'd been waiting his whole life to do this. "Gotcha," Officer Brandt murmured, like he'd just bagged a prize buck. Samuel didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew exactly how fast words could be turned against a man with his skin color. He'd taught hundreds of students about history's ugliest chapters, yet in this moment, the lesson had leapt off the pages and into his wrists. They shoved him toward the squad car, ignoring the scattered protests of onlookers. A young woman filming with her phone caught his eye, her expression a mixture of outrage and helplessness. Samuel wanted to tell her not to bother. Footage didn't save people like him. The drizzle turned to a steady rain, streaking the cruiser's windows as the city blurred past. He tried to breathe evenly, reminding himself he hadn't done anything wrong. But he'd read enough obituaries to know that innocence wasn't armor. The precinct smelled of stale coffee, damp paper, and fear disguised as authority. Brandt pushed Samuel into an interrogation room and left without a word. A flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead, giving the space a sickly hue. Minutes passed 5, maybe 10. The ticking clock on the wall felt like a countdown to something nameless but certain. Then the door creaked open, and another officer entered, holding a thin manila folder. "Samuel Elijah Carter," the man read aloud. Age 62. Born in Atlanta. Former professor at Columbia University. Arrest record. He flipped through the pages and frowned. "None." "Huh." Samuel finally spoke. "Is this where you tell me why I'm here, or should I just keep guessing?" The officer didn't answer. He simply closed the folder, studied Samuel for a long moment, and walked out. Through the thin walls, Samuel could hear muffled voices arguing, urgent. His name was repeated several times, always followed by the word suspect. He leaned back in the cold metal chair, chains rattling at his wrists, and thought of his late wife, who had once told him that the world would never forgive him for being both black and brilliant. Then the shouting began. It started in the hallway to officers barking orders, the sound of boots pounding against tile. Something crashed. Samuel straightened in his chair. The door flew open, and Brandt stumbled in, his face pale. "Stay here," he barked, before slamming it shut again. But Samuel had already heard it, 3 letters cutting through the chaos like a blade. FBI. What happened next would rewrite the night. The shouts outside the door turned into a deafening roar. Boots pounded the hallway like a war drum. Samuel's mind raced. Was this rescue, or another layer of hell? The door burst open again, this time not with Brandt's swagger, but with force, pure, controlled violence. 3 men in black tactical gear stormed in, rifles raised. Their vests were heavy with gear, their faces hidden behind black balaclavas. One of them barked, "Secure the package." Samuel's first thought was package. Then he realized, in their world, he was the package. 2 agents flanked him instantly, unlocking the cuffs with a speed that made Brandt's earlier fumbling look like a bad joke. The 3rd agent was already in his earpiece, voice calm but urgent. "Carter is in our custody. Confirm exit route." Samuel's heart thudded. "Wait, who are you?" The agent closest to him, tall, square-jawed, eyes like steel, finally pulled down his mask. "Special Agent Morris. FBI. We don't have time to explain. You're in danger here." Danger? Samuel wanted to laugh. He was already cuffed, humiliated, and shoved into a cell. What could be worse? Then a gunshot ripped through the hallway. Morris's head snapped toward the door. "Move." They hustled Samuel out of the room, his legs stumbling to keep up. The corridor was chaos, uniformed officers shouting at armed FBI agents, radios blaring conflicting orders. One local cop had his weapon drawn, yelling, "You can't just take him. This is our jurisdiction." Morris didn't even slow down. Not anymore. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with Brandt, who had his gun halfway out of its holster. "You're not walking out with him," he snarled. In one fluid motion, Morris shoved Samuel behind him, raised his sidearm, and leveled it squarely at Brandt's chest. The air between them was electric, charged with the kind of hatred that had nothing to do with procedure and everything to do with principle. "Stand down," Morris said, his voice so flat and deadly that it froze the hallway. For a moment, Samuel thought Brandt would pull the trigger anyway. His finger twitched, but another FBI agent slid in from the side, weapon ready, and Brandt hesitated just long enough for the decision to be made for him. Morris shoved past, dragging Samuel toward the back exit. Outside, rain poured harder, drumming on the roof of a waiting black SUV with tinted windows. They shoved Samuel into the back seat, two agents climbing in beside him while Morris took the passenger seat. The driver gunned the engine, and they peeled away from the curb. Samuel sat there, drenched, adrenaline roaring through his veins. He had 100 questions, but his voice came out quieter than he intended. Why? Morris turned halfway toward him. Because 30 minutes from now, you were supposed to be dead. Samuel blinked. Not by our hand, Morris added quickly. But someone in that precinct was going to make sure you didn't leave it alive. We intercepted chatter. It was planned. Samuel stared at him. Planned? I've never even been arrested before tonight. That's what made it easier, Morris said grimly. No priors. No history. No one would believe you were anything but a dangerous suspect resisting arrest. The SUV weaved through traffic, headlights slicing the wet streets. The agents in the back didn't speak, their eyes scanning for tails. Samuel tried to process. His life had already been reduced to sound bites for someone else's story. Black man, resisting arrest, tragic but necessary. He'd read those headlines 100 times. Now he was dangerously close to becoming one. Morris reached into his jacket and pulled out a small file folder, dropping it on Samuel's lap. That's you. Or at least, the version of you they were going to use. Samuel flipped it open. His own face stared back at him from a grainy surveillance photo. The caption read, "Primary suspect in federal investigation, domestic terrorism." Samuel almost laughed. Domestic terrorism? I teach history. Not anymore, you don't, Morris said, voice tight. Someone planted that profile in a shared federal database. We're still tracing the source. But here's what matters. If we hadn't found it, every cop in the country would be looking at you like a walking target. Samuel felt the car swerve as they took another turn. The city blurred into shadow and rain outside. He swallowed hard. So this is bigger than one bad arrest. It's bigger than one city, Morris said. They didn't stop until they reached an underground garage beneath a nondescript building. The SUV rolled past a checkpoint where armed guards scanned their IDs, then into a dimly lit bay. As they hustled him inside, Samuel felt the oppressive weight of the concrete walls. This wasn't a police station. This was something else. They brought him into a secured room, no windows, just a long table, 2 chairs, and a wall of surveillance monitors. A woman in a dark suit was already there, flipping through a stack of documents. She looked up as they entered. "Dr. Carter," she said smoothly, "I'm Deputy Director Langford. We've been monitoring you for the past 48 hours. Samuel stiffened. "Monitoring me?" Langford gestured for him to sit. "Not because of you. Because of the people watching you." He sat, every muscle taut. Langford continued. "You gave a lecture at Howard University 3 days ago. During the Q&A, you corrected a student who repeated a fabricated quote attributed to a founding father. That correction was recorded, clipped out of context, and uploaded to an extremist forum. From there, a narrative began that you were part of an anti-American academic cell recruiting students for violent action." Samuel blinked. "That's absurd." "Of course it is," Langford said, her voice measured. "But in the wrong hands, absurdity is a weapon. Someone fed that narrative into a law enforcement watch list, complete with a fake warrant. When the local police picked you up tonight, they thought they were doing their duty." Samuel leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "And the part where I end up dead in their custody?" Langford's eyes hardened. "That wasn't duty. That was personal. At least one officer in that precinct is connected to a militia group with a history of targeting black academics. We were about 30 minutes behind their timeline when we intercepted a message confirming your transfer to the morgue." Silence settled like a heavy blanket. Samuel felt the weight of every second that had passed since the cuffs closed around his wrists. He thought of Brandt's smirk, the way the officers had looked at him not as a man, but as an inevitability. Finally, he asked, "What happens now?" Langford folded her hands. "Now, we keep you alive. And we find out who did this, because if they can fabricate a target this easily, you won't be the last." Samuel let out a long breath. "You think I'll help you?" "You don't have a choice," Langford replied. Morris stepped forward, placing the folder back in front of him. And for what it's worth, Professor, we're not here because you're black. We're here because you're right. The words landed somewhere deep, tangled in years of knowing the difference between being defended because of who you are and being defended in spite of it. Samuel didn't know which this was yet, but he knew one thing: this wasn't over. Samuel stared at the folder for a long time, its thin manila edges mocking him. The weight it carried wasn't in the paper, it was in what it meant. Why me? He finally asked. Why go through all this trouble for me? Langford tilted her head. Because you're credible. You've got a spotless record, decades of academic respect, and a history of speaking out against injustice. That makes you valuable to them both as a target to destroy and as a message to others. Destroying me is a message? Yes, Morris said flatly. It tells every other black intellectual, every activist, every student, stay quiet, or this will be you. Samuel rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had been. So, what do you want me to hide? Wait until you find them. Langford's eyes locked on his. No, we want you to help us bait them. The room seemed to shrink around him. Bait them? We need them to make their next move, she continued. Right now, they know we interfered, but they don't know how much we know. If you disappear, they'll vanish underground. If you go back out there, under our watch, they'll try again. And that's when we take them down. Samuel almost laughed. You're asking me to walk into the lion's den so you can catch a few lions? Langford's voice was calm, but unyielding. Yes, and we'll keep you alive while you do it. Morris stepped forward. You're not alone in this, Professor. You'll have an entire team on you at all-time surveillance, plainclothes agents, even decoys. But you're the only one who can draw them out. Samuel's mind flashed to the cold eyes of Officer Brandt, the way he'd looked at him like he'd already written the obituary. Could he really face that again? Give me a reason, Samuel said quietly. One reason I shouldn't just vanish tonight and never look back. Morris's jaw tightened. Because if you disappear, the next man won't have an FBI team to pull him out. And the people who set you up will still be out there, moving on to the next target. Samuel leaned back, closing his eyes. It was a cruel truth, but it was truth nonetheless. All right, he said finally. I'll do it. The plan was simple on paper and terrifying in reality. Samuel would return to his normal routine, or at least the appearance of it. The FBI would embed surveillance in every place he set foot. Any attempt to target him would be met with overwhelming force. Langford handed him a secure phone. This is your lifeline. One button alerts us. Don't hesitate to use it. They moved him to a safe house for the night, an unremarkable apartment in a quiet neighborhood, already swept for bugs. Morris stayed just down the hall. Samuel lay awake until nearly dawn, the rain outside tapping the window like a metronome for his racing thoughts. He thought of his students, his lectures on the civil rights era, his speeches about the importance of standing up to injustice. Now he was in the very story he'd always taught about, only this one didn't have the luxury of hindsight. By morning, the game had already begun. Samuel walked into a small cafe he'd frequented for years. The owner, Mrs. Hernandez, greeted him warmly, but her eyes flickered toward the two men in plain clothes at the far table. She didn't know who they were, but she could tell they were watching. He ordered coffee and took a seat by the window. Outside, life moved on as if the night before had never happened. Commuters rushing past, children pulling at their parents' hands, a delivery truck unloading crates. Then, in the reflection of the glass, Samuel saw him. Brandt. The officer was across the street, leaning against a lamppost, pretending to scroll his phone. But his eyes never left Samuel. Samuel's grip tightened around his coffee cup. He lowered his head slightly and spoke softly into the phone hidden in his pocket. We've got company. Morris's voice came through his earpiece a second later. We see him. Stay put. He's not alone. Samuel's heart rate spiked. He glanced at the window again and caught sight of another man, a heavy-set figure in a dark hoodie, standing just inside the alley across the street. Morris's tone shifted. Third target moving in from your left. Hold position until we give the word. Samuel forced himself to sip his coffee, every nerve in his body screaming to move. The minutes stretched like hours. Then the door to the cafe opened, and Brandt walked in. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. He walked straight to Samuel's table and sat down. Morning, Professor, Brandt said, his voice dripping with mock courtesy. Miss me? Samuel's mind racetta was wired, every word being recorded. He decided to give nothing away. Can't say I did. Brandt smirked. Funny. I've been thinking about you all night. He leaned in. You know, accidents happen in holding cells. Doors get left unlocked. Sometimes people slip. Samuel's stomach twisted, but he kept his voice even. You here to threaten me in public? Brant chuckled. Public's the safest place for you right now. But the thing about safety is, it doesn't last forever. Before Samuel could reply, the cafe door swung open again and two men in hoodies stepped inside, moving fast. Morris's voice snapped in his ear. Now, down. In a blur, the plainclothes agents at the far table sprang up, weapons drawn. One tackled Brant out of his chair, while another intercepted the hooded men before they could reach Samuel. The cafe erupted in screams as patrons dove for cover. Samuel found himself on the floor, Morris crouched beside him, gun leveled at the chaos. You all right? Samuel nodded shakily. That felt like more than a test. Morris's jaw was tight. It was. They weren't just here to scare you, they were here to finish it. Back at the safe house, Langford's face was carved from stone. We've confirmed Brant's connection to a militia group calling themselves the Sovereign Shield. They've been recruiting from police departments in multiple states, targeting academics and activists of color. And they just got desperate. Samuel's voice was steady now, almost cold. Then it's time we make them sloppy. Langford raised an eyebrow. You have something in mind? Yes, Samuel said. You want bait? Let's give them bait they can't resist. Morris crossed his arms. Go on. I've got a speaking engagement next week at the community center. Small venue. Easy access. Let's leak it in just the right channels. Make them think they've got a shot at public, unprotected. Langford considered him for a long moment. You understand that makes you a live target. Samuel's eyes didn't waver. I understand that if we don't stop them now, someone else ends up in my seat. The days leading up to the event were a blur of preparation. The FBI wired the community center with hidden cameras, placed agents on rooftops, and staged medical teams nearby. Samuel went through his speech again and again, not because he cared about the words, but because it gave him something to focus on besides the fact that people wanted him dead. On the night of the event, the center was packed. Some came for the lecture. Others, Samuel suspected, came for the spectacle. He stepped onto the stage under the bright lights, scanning the crowd, and there near the back saw them. 3 men, all watching him with the same sharp stillness Brant had. The trap was set. Samuel took a breath and began to speak not about history, but about the present, about the quiet, insidious ways racism embedded itself in institutions, about the cost of silence. He could feel the air in the room change, some leaning in, some stiffening. Then, just as planned, the first man moved, and everything erupted. The man in the back row stood slowly, his right hand slipping inside his jacket. Samuel's chest tightened, but he didn't stop speaking. Every second he bought was another second for the FBI to close the noose. The man took 1 step forward, then 2 more. From the wings of the stage, Morris's voice cut through the air like a whip. Federal agents, drop your weapon. The room exploded into chaos. Chairs clattered, people screamed, agents surged from every direction. The man reached for his gun only for a red to appear dead center on his chest. A single, sharp crack rang out as a sniper's round shattered the weapon in his hand. 2 other men near the back tried to bolt, but the exits slammed shut, FBI agents pinning them to the floor. And then Brant appeared. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be under suspension pending investigation. But there he was, moving through the panicked crowd with terrifying focus, a pistol raised and aimed straight at Samuel. Morris was too far away. Langford's voice barked orders over the comms. But there was no time. Brant was closing the gap, weaving through people like a predator. Samuel's mind didn't think. His body moved. He stepped off the stage, ducking low between the folding chairs. Brant fired the bullet slicing through the air where Samuel's head had been. Screams rose to a fever pitch. 2 agents dove for Brant, but he swung wildly, striking one with the butt of his gun and shoving the other aside. Samuel scrambled toward the side of the stage, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might shatter his ribs. Morris came out of nowhere slamming into Brant from the side. The 2 men hit the floor in a violent tangle, Brant snarling like an animal. You think this changes anything? Brant spat, struggling against Morris's grip. You take me down, there's 10 more waiting. Morris's fist drove into Brant's jaw. Not tonight, there aren't. 2 more agents piled on, wrenching the gun from Brant's hand and snapping cuffs around his wrists. Samuel stood frozen, chest heaving, as the reality of it washed over him. He had just looked into the eyes of a man who had every intention of killing him, who believed that killing him was not only justified, but righteous. Langford strode in, her presence slicing through the chaos. "Get him out," she ordered, pointing at Brandt. "And bag every piece of evidence on him before the press gets here." Agents moved in a flurry of controlled efficiency, suspects dragged out, weapons collected, bystanders ushered to safety. Morris came to Samuel's side. "You all right?" Samuel gave a shaky nod. "Alive. That's good enough for me," Morris said, though his eyes told Samuel he'd be watching for signs it wasn't. The days that followed were a blur of debriefings, affidavits, and press coverage. The FBI's operation had not only arrested Brandt and the 3 men from the community center, but had also cracked open a wider network, dozens of names tied to the Sovereign Shield, with caches of illegal weapons, forged warrants, and targeting lists. The public was shocked. The press wanted interviews with Samuel. Civil rights groups wanted him to speak at rallies. Politicians wanted him in photo ops. Langford, however, gave him a choice. "You can step into the light," she said. "Tell your story. Put a face on this case. Or you can disappear, start over somewhere else, and let us handle the rest." Samuel sat in the sterile conference room, the secure phone still in his pocket. "And if I go public? You'll be celebrated by some," Langford said, "and hunted by others. They'll see you as a symbol. Symbols are powerful, but they're also targets." Morris leaned against the wall. "You've already been a target once. You want to spend the rest of your life watching every shadow." Samuel thought of his wife's words years ago. "The world won't forgive you for being both black and brilliant." He'd spent a career proving her wrong. And yet, here he was proof she'd been right. He looked up. "If I disappear, I'm one man saved. If I speak, maybe someone else lives." Langford's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Then you've made your decision." 2 weeks later, Samuel stood before a packed auditorium at Howard University. Cameras from every major network lined the back wall. The air buzzed with anticipation. He stepped to the podium and let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. 2 weeks ago, I was arrested for a crime I did not commit. That part is not surprising. History is full of men who look like me being accused of things they didn't do. What is surprising is that 30 minutes after my arrest, the FBI came through the doors not to question me, but to save my life. The crowd was still. I tell you this not because I am special, but because I am not. What happened to me could happen to anyone who challenges a system built to silence them. I am here today because there are people, agents, journalists, citizens who decided that silence was no longer an option." He leaned forward, his voice steady but charged. "The people who tried to end my life called themselves the Sovereign Shield. But sovereignty belongs to the people, and a shield should protect the innocent, not be used as a weapon against them. They failed to kill me, but they also failed to scare me, and they failed to scare you." Applause erupted, not polite, but fierce. A standing ovation built like a wave, rolling through the room. Samuel stepped back from the podium, scanning the crowd. In the back, Morris stood with his arms crossed, a small smile on his face. Langford was beside him, stone-faced but with the faintest nod of approval. For the first time since that night on Jefferson Avenue, Samuel felt something other than fear or anger. He felt purpose. That night, alone in his apartment, Samuel stood at the window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, remnants of the Sovereign Shield were regrouping. Somewhere, people who had never heard his name were still living under the same quiet threat he had faced. He picked up the secure phone, dialed a number he'd been given before parting with Langford. When she answered, he said simply, "I'm in. Whatever you need next, I'm in." There was a pause, then her voice measured, certain. "Good. Because this isn't over." Samuel ended the call and set the phone down. In the reflection of the glass, he saw himself not as a victim, but as a man still standing. The rain began to fall again, just as it had the night they'd taken him. But this time, it didn't sound like a countdown. It sounded like a beginning. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.